Welcome everyone to Braille Formatting for the Florida Standardized Assessments webinar. I'm Kathy Kremplewski, the Braille and Accessible Assessment Specialist for Florida Instructional Materials Center for the Visually Impaired. And it is September 18th, 2019. Today, our rough agenda is going to be, we're doing the welcome and introductions, and then at about 2:10 or earlier, we want to cover the overview of Florida Standardized Statewide Assessment Program, so you have an idea of the scope and what is entailed in that. At 2:20, we'll get to the 2019-2020 Braille Code updates, and then we'll go into the Florida Standards Assessments FSA Braille formatting of the practice tests, because I can use practice tests since they're not secure material. And then we're going to have questions, evaluations, and adjourn. So to make sure we have all the room we need for the Braille and everything else, I'm going to discontinue my video now, so you'll just hear me, but you'll get to see everything on the screen. All right. Okay, so our magic code for in-service. The opening code is keep calm. Keep calm. Okay, so for our overview of Florida's standardized statewide assessment programs. So this chart gives you an idea and shows you the different assessments for those that are not on access classes, for not on the alternate assessment. So essentially your general education students. So in blue, you've got the Florida Standards Assessments, and they cover grades 3 to 10 for ELA, which is your reading and writing, although writing is only grades 4 to 10, and math, 3 to 8. It also covers the end of course exam for Algebra 1 and geometry. So the FSA is done by the company AIR, American Institutes for Research, and they subcontract with a company called DRC, Data Recognition Corporation. Then we have our Science and Social Studies statewide examinations. Those are the next generation Sunshine State standards, and those are done by the company Pearson. Those are the ones that used to do FCAT. So they, all of these companies, AIR, DRC, and Pearson, contract with Braille Solutions Region 4 Education Services Center in Texas to do the Braille and the tactile graphics and everything for our standardized state assessments, and they do a wonderful job. EOCs are end of course exams, and those are given in the spring, summer, fall, and winter. So there are retakes of those all through the year. For Algebra 1 retakes, ELA reading retakes, and ELA writing retakes, those are usually given in the spring and in the fall, just twice a year. Any questions? All right. Then we go into our alternate assessment, the Florida alternate assessment. And I couldn't fit it in all the little boxes, but any student taking an alternate assessment should be in an access class. It can be delivered in a general education class, but it should be coded as an access class. So here, if you notice, we've got the same subjects and everything. You've got grades 3 to 10 ELA, the writing, ELA reading. ELA writing will be 4 to 10, 3 to 8 math. You've got Algebra 1, geometry, and then we have our science, grades 5 and 8, science and biology, end of course. And then you've got the civics and US history end of course exams. Now all of these are done by a company that was called Measured Progress for a long time. They're in the process of changing their name. So Measured Progress is merging with another company, and they're going to become Cognia. So if you have anything to do with the Florida Standards Alternate Assessment, you may see measured progress or you may see cognia. As things go along, you'll see more cognia, and eventually it'll just say cognia. And the American Printing House for the Blind, APH, is the one that does the Braille for the alternate assessment. It's one company that does the all of the different assessments. Right. Just a reminder. Oh, and from Kay, we've got a reminder. Yes, there must be a significant cognitive impairment for students to be taking the alternate assessment. If vision is your primary disability, they should not be on the FSAA, the Florida Standards Alternate Assessment. And in fact, certain things, I went to the assessment meeting recently, and the head of the Bureau of Exceptional Education and Student Services, Ms. Tirado, was talking about the fact that if you qualify for a specific learning disability, that pretty much negates you being on the alternate assessment, because the definition for a specific learning disability is exactly opposite of having a significant cognitive disability. So they're really starting to look at that and look at who is on which assessments and what is the documentation for those assessments. All right, so the development process is similar for the Florida Standards Assessments, for the Next Generation Sunshine State Standard Assessments, and for the alternate assessment, Florida Standards Alternate Assessments. So they have committee meetings where they bring educators and content folk and all kinds of people. They develop the items. Then they have a sensitivity review and a bias review. And I actually participate in the bias review. There's usually one in the summer and then 2 in September for the FSA and NGSSS. And then for the alternate assessment, it's usually over the summer as well. And so they're reviewing all the items, looking at them as for sensitivity. Is there something culturally that might be offensive to someone in the community or to a parent or things like that? And the bias review, you're looking at it from the perspective of the student. Is there anything in here that would give a student an unfair advantage or put them at a disadvantage? And if you're a teacher of the visually impaired, they're always looking, or teacher of deaf and hard of hearing, they're looking for people to participate in these reviews so they can get information about that. And hopefully, one of the reasons I go is so hopefully we can avoid any issues later on once something actually ends up part of the test, and then we have to adapt it no matter what. And please let me know if I use any terms that anybody's not familiar with or anything like that, because I do this stuff all day long, so I sometimes get carried away. If you participate on a review committee, all of your expenses are paid. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. They pay for everything, and they usually feed you really well. The bias and sensitivity is usually a 2-day meeting, all day long for 2 days. With usually a lot of people, depending on how far you live from it, coming in the night before. They do pay some subs, although with vision, a lot of times we don't get subs. And sometimes you can get a stipend for it. So you can always let us know and we can connect you with who they are and how to sign up for that. So they have these bias review meetings and sensitivity meetings, and all the comments from those people goes to the content people. So they have people with the math and with the science and with the social studies and that kind of thing. Educators, a lot of them, or retired educators in the field and that kind of thing. They come together and they look at those comments and then they adjust from there. Then everything is put through a field test. Then they do the statistical review of how did these field test items do, and if everything checks out okay with the statistics, then it finally ends up on the real assessment. So I was impressed to see and note that all of the rigor that goes into the general education, FSA, and NGSS tests are also done the same way for the Florida Standards Alternate Assessment. They've got as many people's eyes and information are looking at this information as they can. It's not just, oh, let's come up with these and stick them on the test and see how they do. They have a very defined procedure, and they go through a lot of steps to make these tests the absolute best that they can make them. And just to let you note, this slide and the next slide I'm going to show you came from a presentation a couple years ago by Susan Taylor, the executive director at the time of the Test Development Center. So this gives you an idea, okay, these committee meetings and that kind of thing. What are we talking about? So this is an example for 1 year, for 2016 to 2018. So in that time frame, they had 90 members of the ELA reading and writing. They had an alignment study, they had passage and item content review, they had rubric validation, they had writing rangefinder, and standard setting. Those are all separate meetings in separate places. For bias, they had 23 members, and they did mathematics, they did ELA reading and writing, they did social studies and science. For sensitivity, they had 18 members, and they did mathematics, ELA reading, social studies, and science. For science, they had 29 members. They had an expert review and an item content review. For mathematics, they had 46 members. They had an alignment study, an item content review, and rubric validation. And for social studies, they had 23 members, and they had expert and item content review and expert forms review. And I'm reading all this out because I know the picture isn't the best on this one. So in all, they had 229 participants over 20 weeks of meetings and 31 different meetings. So they really put a lot of effort into making Florida's assessments quality assessments that really measure what they are intended to measure. And then also they try and get as much of a diversity as they can. So they keep track on things like ethnicity. So they had 1% Asian, 20% African American, 69% Caucasian, 8% Hispanic, and 2% other. Gender, they had 75% female and 25% male. For county type, they had 12% rural, 40% urban, and 48% suburban. For county size, they had 15% small, 46% medium, and 39% large. And then regional. From the Panhandle, they had 32%. East Central, they had 19%. Northeast, they had 15%. South, they had 17%. And West Central, they had 17%. And they're always, like I said, looking for more people to participate and to fill out and make things much more representative of everybody. They want as much diversity as they possibly can. So once the tests are developed, we at FIMC read every passage and item, then we give suggested modifications that must be approved by the Florida Department of Education, including their Test Development Center. And an item is just a word for one test question. It's the word they use for test question. FIMC assists with, we have the assistance of 4 Braille proofreaders because we strongly believe that the proofreading be done by a Braille reader since a Braille reader is going to be reading the test. And we also proofread all the Braille notes that accompany the Braille tests and the Braille tests themselves. Braille notes or administrator's notes, as in the alternate assessment, are print documents that accompany the tests, and it lists all the changes to the print during the creation of the Braille versions. That's mainly the Braille notes. The administrator notes with the alternate assessment pretty much lists which pages were brailled and where they are and what item and what task it applies to. Then if a manipulative is approved for an item, FIMC gets to create it. We send it off for approval to the Department of Education. If it's approved with the directions, then we take care of shipping it to the districts that need it, and we enclose information on how the districts can ship it back to us when they're done with that and done with testing. And that last year was the first year that we had taken over that part. All right, and I see someone chanting, how do you show interest in the review committees? Okay, so for the review committees, we did turn in a bunch of names, but you can go to, I believe it's the FSA portal and sign up. But Channing, if you send me an email, I'll make sure you get on the invite list. The Test Development Center actually has created a database so that you can sign up, and that way you kind of automatically get generated invitations and that kind of thing. And it also allows you to nominate people. And Kay and I one day sat down and we gave them a whole bunch of teachers of the visually impaired throughout the state for the alternate assessment and for the regular assessment. But yeah, anybody who is interested, please send me an email and I will make sure your name gets put onto the invitation list. All right, you're welcome, Channing. All right, good question. Some of the changes we might recommend for an item or test question might be things like, simple things like if it said fill in the circle. Well, that doesn't make sense for our students, so we'd say write the letter. Things like that. Sometimes it's real simple things and that makes sense like that. Sometimes it's much more complex. Is there a picture? Does a picture needed to be, is a picture needed to be described to be able to answer the question, and then coming up with a description and things like that. So that's what we're doing when we're reviewing the items and the passages and everything. Okay, any questions? Nope. All right. Moving along. Our 2019-2020 Braille Code updates. And some of this information may not be new because it has been posted for a little while. We have a new transition. Notice no more eBay. eBay is gone. The only thing left is UEB. However, now that we've gotten rid of eBay, we've gained other options. So every test is going to be in UEB, but when it comes to math and science tests, starting with the spring 2020 tests, for the math and science tests, you have the option of doing UEB code, or what we're now calling UEB technical, using the technical side of UEB to do the math and science. Or you can have UEB with Nemeth. So still having Nemeth within the UEB context. So there will be the option of both for the FSA and NGSSS. So just the math and science of the FSA and NGSSS, you have the option of either using straight UEB, no Nemeth, or using UEB with Nemeth. All right, and I see a question. Can you say anything about political cartoons in U.S. history? Yes, and okay. Doesn't really fit in, so I'll go ahead and address that now. So with political cartoons in U.S. history, or political cartoons in general, that's part of the curriculum. And as I'll stress later with a couple other examples, you have to look at the standards, because if it's in the standards, then our students are expected to know it. And it doesn't matter if they can't see the political cartoon. What will happen then is a description will be generated, and that description will be looked at by people who know the content to make sure that that description gives enough information so that the question can be answered, but doesn't give too much information that the answer is given away or that it misleads from the correct answer. Sometimes that's a very difficult balance, but political cartoons and things like that, they are described usually in the Braille test. So the student will read whatever the introductory sentence or whatever is, they'll read the description of the cartoon, and then they'll read the question, and then they'll answer the question. And that's usually how political cartoons are handled. And they should be practicing that, because the curriculum, if I remember right from US history, I know when I had students in US history, they had to deal with political cartoons. So we had to describe the cartoons to them, and the teacher needs to work with students as to, okay, what are important elements, or how are things emphasized, things like that. It's the same thing when you get into the language arts as well. I remember in high school language arts, they had to do whole sections on film and things like shading and lighting and things like that. If it's part of the standard, it is fair game on any of the tests. So if it's part of the curriculum, you've got to make sure your students work with your student and with the general educator to make sure your students understand the concepts that are being addressed in the standards. All right. So with the, back to the UEB and the choice. So for math and science, you're going to have 4 choices. There's contracted UEB technical Braille, uncontracted UEB technical Braille, contracted UEB with Nemeth Braille, and uncontracted UEB with Nemeth Braille. For reading, writing, social studies, it'll just be contracted UEB Braille or uncontracted UEB Braille. Now, depending on how your district codes things, and like I worked in Hillsborough, so I know Hillsborough's system, they have a mainframe that kind of keeps track of what students' accommodations are. And their mainframe only accepts like 1 letter designation for what Braille code. So they're going to have to do some finagling, but the Department of Education, we made them aware of this. And so they worked it out so that 1 letter designation can fit everything. But so you need to work with your school assessment coordinator and or your district assessment coordinator to make sure that the right type of Braille practice test gets ordered, and that's at a different time than the regular, ordering the actual Braille test, and make sure both gets ordered the right way with the right information, because it's either, depending on the district, it's either the school assessment coordinator or more likely the district assessment coordinator that needs to order those materials. We did do a survey at the end of last year about the use of UEB technical versus the use of UEB with Nemeth, and the state seems to be about split, roughly half of the teachers are teaching only UEB technical, and about half the teachers are teaching Nemeth within UEB context. All right. Okay, and I see repeat ordering differences, please. Okay, so and we'll cover this more in the assessment webinar when we do it. But the practice tests are ordered at a different time than the operational real Braille tests are ordered. It's done through the assessment coordinator, so I don't know the exact process, and I think some of that depends on your district. But there's 2 different times when those things are ordered. And there's certain ways of how they order it. So you'd have to work with, like I said, either your school assessment coordinator and or your district assessment coordinator for how and when to order those materials. Any other questions on that? Okay. Now, this has not changed. For the alternate assessment, Florida Standards alternate assessment, it was already too late to try and make any changes for this year. It will be only UEB, and it'll be UEB with Nemeth. There is no option this year for UEB technical with no Nemeth. We're looking and working with the department, and we're looking into this and figuring this out. It should be, something should be changing with this soon, but we don't know yet what or how or any specifics. So just know for spring 2020, for the alternate assessment, it's going to be all UEB, eBay's gone, all UEB, and all the math and science will be UEB with Nemeth code. But changes are coming. It's just going to be a little bit slower and a little bit different with the alternate assessment. And we're working to help with this change. All right. Changes to formatting with Nemeth in UEB context. And this is just a reminder, I did this in the webinar last year. But if you've been following this since the beginning, I remember we first did the Using UEB and Nemeth webinars, I think it was in early 2015. And since then, they've changed the guidance for transcription using the Nemeth code within UEB context at least 1 or 2 times now. So just remember that things are adjusting as they go along. Well, as things adjust until it becomes solidified, that means textbooks as well as assessment materials might appear differently depending on when they were created. And that's just the nature of us transitioning and of them adjusting and coming up with better ways to do things. So this mainly is affecting kind of what goes between the Nemeth switch indicators and what doesn't. Because I think the more they've worked with this and used this and that kind of thing, they've kind of adjusted their perspective on what really needs to be switched in and out of Nemeth and what doesn't. But tests from different years may be formatted differently. However, everything in an individual test should be formatted the same way. It's just if you start, like if your student makes a mention of, well, last year I read this and this was in the Nemeth switch indicators, and this year it's not. That's probably because of a change in the guidance. We do the best we can with the information we have right at this moment, knowing that the information might change slightly tomorrow. Any questions on that? Okay. Also be aware, using Nemeth symbols versus UEB symbols. Every student needs to learn all UEB symbols, including symbols used for math and science. Because if something comes up in a reading passage, such a math or science type symbol such as a superscript or a subscript, a negative sign, a percent sign, a degree sign. If it's a passage that's about something science related or something like that, if it appears in the literary context such as ELA reading or writing passages, then those will be done in UEB. Those will not be done in Nemeth because it is not a math or science test. So students have to know all the UEB symbols. Therefore, it's vital that students be taught all the UEB symbols, even if they're using Nemeth for math and science. They need to be able to recognize those other symbols. All right, any questions so far before we delve into the practicals? All right, so now we're going to take a look at the Florida Standards Assessment practice test questions and how they're going to be formatted. And some of this is changing starting with spring 2020. So regarding the FSA ELA writing practice tests, and the writing practice tests, there is going to be some differences between the practice tests depending on if they were revised or not. So if you have access to several practice tests, if you have access to several practice tests and you start comparing, you may see some differences because we're shifting away from a couple of things this year that previously we used to include. And I'll get to that in a minute and let you know. But so the ELA writing uses the same formatting for passages as ELA reading. To address the writing prompt, there's usually 3 to 4 sources or passages given to students to read, but these passages can include, or the passage itself can be, pictures, graphics, whatever. Anything is fair game. And then starting with spring 2020 tests, bullets are no longer going to be omitted. Now that eBay's gone, and eBay didn't have bullet symbols, but UEB does have, has part of their code a bullet symbol. and now we're fully UEB, we're going to be including bullets in all tests. Also, we would always put the word paragraph before paragraph numbers, because when we first saw the FSA test, that was a new formatting that none of us had seen before, with all these consecutive numbers for paragraphs, and the numbers continued. So you'd have paragraphs 1 through 5 in source 1, and then paragraphs 6 through 10 in source 2, and then so on. So initially we thought, to avoid confusion, put the word paragraph so the students realize, oh, that's a paragraph number. But that was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So now it's not, the students should be used to this format. The tests should be, the tests are formatted like this. Textbooks should be formatted like this. This is a pretty common thing now. So I don't think they need the word paragraph added anymore. So we're taking that out. And some of this with the, now that they were revising the reading tests and the math tests, now is a good time to make this change as well. So the reading tests and the math tests will be updated to include bullets and remove the word paragraph from the paragraph numbers, unless the word paragraph is shown in print. And we'll get into specifics about this in a few minutes. But for the writing tests, you probably will still see paragraph because they're not redoing the writing practice tests, okay? So any practice materials that have been updated or changed, we've been able to update and change the Braille. If they have not been updated, then they're going to be the way they were originally. With the ELA writing, the only thing specific to it is the writing prompt. There's nothing else really special about it. So here's an example of the writing prompt. This one is from the grade 4 practice test. So you've got your write an informative essay about the effects of wild animals and humans, effects wild animals and humans have on each other when they live in the same area. Use information from the passage in your essay, and then you've got your bullets with managing your time and be sure to include, and then you've got your response should be in the form of a multi-paragraph essay, and then the last sentence we always change. Instead of write your response in the space provided on the practice test, it's going to be write your response on your Braille paper. So if we look at the Braille for that, you see, I believe, fairly standard formatting. Now, I know we have some transcribers, I think, and we have some TVIs, and probably a mixture of other people. So if you're a transcriber, you're used to the idea of 1-1 formatting or 3-1 formatting and that kind of thing. But if you're not, so what it refers to is the first number tells you where you're going to start a line, what cell. So this top paragraph is in 1-1 format. So the very first symbol in Braille is a capital symbol, .6. That starts in cell 1. But then if you notice, it continues to more than one line, and like humans is the last word on the first line in print, but humans is actually in the second row of Braille, the third word in. So that ran over from the first line because Braille has to stay the same size. You can't shrink it or anything like that like you can print. So you're going to need more Braille lines to fit the stuff in print. So if it goes to the next line, even though it was part of the first print line, that's called a runover. So the second number tells you where you start the runover. And so in this case, it's also cell 1. So everything is starting and running over into cell 1, and it makes that nice little block at the top. Okay. So paragraphs are 1-1. They start in cell 1, and any material that doesn't fit on the line will run over and start in cell 1 on the next line. Bullets are in list format for transcribers. And I added bullets in this because, again, this is a new change. So pretty much the bullets are just going to go in where they would go, and then you have your information that follows the bullet. List format starts in cell 3. So some of the Braille practice tests are being redone and some aren't, as we talked about. Some will have bullets if it's revised. So some the reading, math, and some of the science. And some will not if it's not being revised. So like writing and social studies, the civics and US history and the writing will not be revised. So those will not have bullets and they'll have the word paragraph in there. All right. Any questions? Now, when you get a chance to get the PowerPoint, you can print this out. And if you print 2 slides per page, you can get it so you'll have the print copy and the Braille copy on the same page. You might have to add a slide here or there to make it work out that way for the whole presentation. But that'll make it easier for looking at. That's one of the downsides of the webinar format, is we have to look at one and then look at the other. All right, so again, new, starting with spring 2020 tests, the words paragraph or sometimes section, if it has to do with a play, are no longer going to be placed before the consecutive numbers of the paragraphs in the passage or when the paragraph numbers are cited in the items. The only exception to this is if the print has, in parentheses, paragraph, and it might be paragraph 8 or it might be paragraph 9 to 10. At the end of answer options, this will be retained. It's just going to be moved to precede the answer options. And we'll see an example of this. But there, the word paragraph actually is in print, so we're going to keep that. Another part of this is we're making the print, the Braille match the print as much as possible. Okay, no problem, Bobby. The PowerPoint is going to be posted with the recording to the website. So you'll be able to download the PowerPoint from the website. All right. All right, so let's look. So the reasoning behind these changes is to more closely align with the print, and since students are now familiar with this stuff, as I think I mentioned. All right, so here's the first example. So we've got passage 1, beautiful as a day. So you've got number 1, and then you have the first paragraph, I say, let's take blah, 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 and then paragraph 2. This is from the FSA ELA Reading Grade 6 Practice Test passage. So we look at the Braille, and the Braille, we've got the directions at the top are in 5-5. So the very beginning of it starts in cell 5, and any runovers are going to go back to cell 5, and it makes that nice little block at the top. Then you've got the indented heading, that's in 7. And you've got paragraphs that are going to start in cell 3 with runovers in cell 1. And notice that that first paragraph, you just have number 1, and then you have the open quote, I say. And then the same thing with the next paragraph. It starts in cell 3, and you have the open quote, cap, father says. And it goes on from there, but the runover goes to cell 1. So it's a 3-1 style. All right. So questions about that? This is actually different than when I presented. I gave a similar presentation at the Visual Aid Volunteers of Florida 2019 conference, and at that point we were still retaining the paragraph. Okay, so for the next one, it shows when you have the paragraph number with the excerpt inside a question. So we have read the excerpt from passage 1, you have the paragraph number 3, and then you have the excerpt. So for this one, the first sentence of the question is going to be in 1-5. So the item number is going to start in cell 1. This one doesn't run over, but if it were to run over, anything after that would have gone to cell 5. And then we've got the excerpt is in 7-5. So the number 3 starts in cell 7, and any runovers go to cell 5. And we notice we've got the 3 with no paragraph in front, with the word paragraph no longer in front of it. Then the question is in 5-5. So it starts in cell 5 and runs over in cell 5. And there's a space between the excerpt and the direction preceding it, and between the excerpt and the question following it. And then you've got the answer choices, which is in 3-5. So they start in cell 3 with the capital or the grade 1 indicator, depending on which letter, and then they run over to 5. Questions? Nope. All right, so moving on. This shows when there's more than one answer choice with each paragraph number. In here, you notice it says fill in the circles. This is going to be changed, and we'll see on the next slide. And then this example is shown in Braille on 2 slides because the paragraph 10 and 11 went on to a second Braille page to keep those answer choices together. And I wish I could show all of it at once, but can't do that in this format. All right, so we've got the directions in 5-5, makes that nice block at the top. Then we've got the first sentence of the item with the item number that's in 1-5. So the item number, the numeric indicator, starts in cell 1, and any runovers go to cell 5. It's modified to read, write the letter of the bold 2 details, and it goes on from there. And this would be explained in the Braille notes. It would note to the teacher reading the Braille notes that this was a change from the print test. Starting in cell 5 with the paragraph number, you put on a separate line before the answer choices. And this is a guess as to how it's going to look in the new Braille versions, because I haven't seen the new Braille versions of these yet. We're still working on item reviews and stuff like that. So I haven't actually seen what this looks like in Braille for this year, but this is what I imagine it would look like. Answer choices are in 3-5 and vertically listed. We always adjust those to vertical. Answer choices with paragraphs 10 and 11 are moved to the next page to keep the answer choices together. So moving to the next slide, we've got the number 10 on the line by itself preceding the answer choices E, F, G, H, and I, and J, which are all in 3-5 format and all vertically aligned. And then the same kind of thing with paragraph 11, and we've got answer choices K, L, and M in 3-5 as well. All right. With the FSA reading grade 5 practice test, here's our exception. So in this one, we've got item 11, and you've got answer choices A through E in a paragraph format, and at the very end of the paragraph, there's parentheses paragraph 8. But that doesn't work well for a Braille reader to see that at the very end. So because the paragraph is in print, it says the word paragraph and 8. We retain the Braille, but move it and place it so it makes more sense for the Braille reader. So it'll move to precede the answer choices, and instead of parentheses, we're going to remove the parentheses and put it in transcriber note symbols. Also, the fill in the blank is going to be changed, and we'll see on the next slide with the Braille. So on the next slide, we've got the first 2 sentences in the item are in 1-5. The second sentence is modified to read, write the letters of the bold 2 sentences, and it goes on, which will again be in the Braille notes, explained in the Braille notes. Starting in cell 5, paragraph 8 is moved from after the answer choices to before the answer choices, and the parentheses are replaced with transcriber note symbols, and it's put on its own Braille line so that the answer choices can all align vertically and be in 3-5 format. questions about that? Okay. All right, so next, with grades 6 to 9, they contain footnotes. And we chose to use the older Braille formats so that the footnote appears on the following Braille line, instead of having to find where the end of the page is, whether the end of the page is on the same page, the next page, or 3 pages later. We really strongly felt this is a test, there's only so much time. It would be a lot easier for the Braille reader to just have the footnote right on the next line. The grade 1 symbol indicators and grade 1 terminators are used as needed to allow for contractions within the footnote definitions. And this is where it can get a little tricky. And you got to kind of really strategically think about that. So we're going to look at examples. So this one is from the grade 6 reading practice test. It's from passage 1, and it's regarding footnote number 1. And so footnote number 1 is Bank-Martins. And by footnote definition, I mean at the bottom you have the superscript 1, and then you have, without a space, Bank-Martins, and then it says small birds that make their nests in tunnels dug in clay or sand. That's what I'm talking about when I say footnote definition. What is the footnote referring to? So the footnote is in the last line of paragraph 5. So here I took out the word paragraph before paragraph 5. Paragraphs are in 3.1, and then the footnote definition is in 7.5. So you can see down you got that nice blocked paragraph, and then you have that indented part. That's your footnote definition. Here we use the grade 1 symbol indicator, and it's needed because the numeric indicator, you have the numeric indicator number 1, and if you don't have a grade 1 symbol indicator, that B could be read as 2. So it would read superscript 12 ANK instead of superscript 1, grade 1 indicator BANK. You need to distinguish that B as a B and not the number 2. But BANK has no contractions in it, so a grade 1 symbol indicator is fine to use in that situation. And grade 1 mode is started by the numeric indicator, but grade 1 mode, when it's started by the numeric indicator, is canceled by that hyphen. Okay, and we're going to see as we get through more examples, this, like I said, can get a little complex. But because BANK before the hyphen doesn't have a contraction, we don't need a grade 1 terminator. We just need that grade 1 symbol to distinguish B. And questions? Okay, so now the next one, we've got the superscript 1. This is from grade 6 practice test, passage 3, footnote 1. So the footnote definition is superscript 1, no space, decontamination process. So now we have a letter that's A through J that could be confused, but we also have contractions. So we have 2 issues with this one. So if we look at the Braille, the top again is in, the paragraph is in 3.1. The footnote definition is in 7.5. Here, we want to use the grade 1 terminator because we still need something between the 1 and the D, so it's read as 1 and then D, not 14, because the D could be confused with 4. But because we have the IN contraction and the TION contraction in the word decontamination, and we want to make words contracted if they're contracted words, then we want to make sure that we can use those contractions. And because grade 1 mode is started by the numeric indicator, you have to have something cancel that grade 1 mode, and that's why we use the grade 1 terminator there. Okay? And I see there was a note. There's some questions in the Q&A box. So, okay, I think we addressed political cartoons. Okay, some of this has to do with cartoons, but so footnotes are for now reverting to coding definitions. Okay, Cynthia, it doesn't have to do with eBay. It has to do with the Braille formats 2011 versus Braille formats 2016. I believe in Braille formats 2016, the footnote definition is usually put at the very end, where the page change is. But in Braille formats 2011, I believe, and I could be wrong on this one because I'm not real familiar with the formats, I believe it was on the next line. So, but it might go back to a different Braille formats as well, I'm not sure. And transcribers that are out there, that if you know I'm wrong, please let me know. Please type in the chat box if it's a different, if it's Braille other than Braille formats 2011. All right, and I think I addressed most of it, and we can come back to the questions about the political cartoons later, because we're focused right now on footnotes. So again, on this, with this one, we use the grade 1 Terminator because we gotta distinguish the 4 from a D, and we wanna keep contractions. And so the only way to get rid of that is get rid of grade 1 mode, which is using the grade 1 Terminator. All right. So our next one, we've got superscript, fortnight, and then 2 weeks. This is from the grade 7 practice test, passage 1, footnote 1. So for this one, I took out the paragraph number and that kind of thing, and paragraphs continue to be in 3.1 with the footnote definition being in 7.5. And here, the grade 1 terminators used in the definition because we want to use the symbol for 4, FOR, and we want to use the GH contraction. We don't have the issue of F being confused with a number because it's the symbol for 4, the full Braille cell, for FOR. So that's not an issue. But the main issue is we want to use contractions, and so we can only use contractions if we cancel grade 1 mode that started because of the numeric indicator. Let's see, thank you, Lynette. The change in footnote position began in formats 2011, and in was the next line, on the next line in formats 1997. Okay, thank you. Thank you for correcting me. I wondered if that might be one. So we're actually going back to and using, just for the tests, for the assessments, we're using the Braille formats 97 way of doing it, where it's on the next line right away. And then after the definition, it goes back to whatever the paragraph was talking about. Or the next paragraph, whatever comes next. Thank you, Lynette, for that. Okay. So questions about this. So essentially, if you have contractions and you want to use contractions, which you do if it's a contracted test, then you're going to use the grade 1 terminator unless there's no contractions, and you just need, and you don't need to worry about anything getting confused. All right, so the next one we have superscript 1, capital Yankee. This is from grade 7 practice test, passage 2, footnote 1. So on this one, and again, we still have the same formatting. Paragraph is in 3.1, footnotes are in 7.5. Here, nothing is needed because the Y is capitalized, and Y can't be confused with a number, so it doesn't need anything because it can't be confused with a number. And with that capital, we don't have to worry about it, and there's no contractions. So here you simply have numeric indicator 1 and capital Yankee. You don't need anything else. Questions about that? It's always kind of a, you're asking yourself, can something get confused? Do I need to get out of grade 1 mode so I can use contractions? And that kind of thing. All right. Moving along. All right, so this time we have superscript 2 Grail, capital G-R-A-A-L. And this is from grade 8 practice test, passage 1, footnote 2. So on this one, again, we're in paragraphs are 3.1. Footnote definition is in 7.5. Here, nothing's needed because the G is capitalized. Now, with UEB, if something's capitalized, it can't be a number. So this couldn't be possibly mistaken for 27, because with that capital, you'd never have a capitalized number. So you know with that capital, that's a letter following it. And there's no contractions in Grail, so you don't need to use a grade 1 Terminator because there's no contractions. Okay, questions? Does this make sense? Okay, I don't see anything. Okay. Oh, and I see from Kimberly, so which format do I use, 2011 or 2016? That's a good question. So formats 2016 is what will be used on everything else for UEB except on these tests for footnotes only. So it's just the formatting of where the footnotes are placed that we use the formats 1997. Other than that, everything's going to be formatted according to formats 2016, which goes with UEB. Okay, good question. Okay, good. Lori, I'm glad it makes sense. Yeah, it takes a little while to kind of wrap your mind around it, but then once you got it, it does make sense. All right, so then moving on, the format is changed for editing task items on the FSA ELA reading tests that require students to choose the correct word or phrase. So instead of filling each blank in the passages have turned to underlined sections, and the questions have underlined sections. So students are just going to write the letter of the word or phrase that's correct. And so we'll see in the next page. So here we've got the passage above, which would probably be on the preceding page, and we have underline ingredients, colon, and we have underline glamorous, spelled G-L-A-M-O-R-U-S. And this is from grade 9 reading practice test number 16. And then we have 16 part A and 16 part B. Part A has to do with ingredients and part B has to do with glamorous. Now I'm only going to show part of the I only showed part of the passage for this that was relevant to the question. So the directions for the passage read the passage and then answer numbers 14 through 16. There are 4 underlined words or phrases in the passage to show which word or phrase may be incorrect. And then there's going to be directions for the items, and the directions for the items read, now answer numbers 14 to 16, choose the correct word or phrase for each of the following. The Braille will focus on the section, the Braille I'm going to show next will focus on the section concerning part B, which is a spelling item, and therefore with spelling items will be done in uncontracted Braille, which is noted on the transcriber's notes page for the student, which we always encourage encourage your students to read the transcriber's notes pages and the special symbols pages. So it'll be noted that spelling words are presented in uncontracted Braille without the grade 1 indicator. That's the note that'll be on the transcriber's note page regarding spelling items. And that includes the spelling item inside the passage as well as inside the question and the answer choices. So and this same example we're going to use for something else in a minute too. All right, so first we're focusing in just on the part of the passage that had the underlined glamorous word. So we have the two different sections. You have the excerpt with the underlined word and the part that corresponds with it. And then the Braille section, we have just the spelling item. The question number by itself would be in 1-7. The section that has part A, that would be done in 3-7. So it's start in cell 3 and any runovers go to cell 7. And then the answer choices start in cell 5 and run over to cell 7. You can't see that in this example, but in looking at other examples, it's 5-7. All right, so if we notice, you've got glamorous in each of the answer choices is uncontracted, and glamorous inside the passage is uncontracted. And you've got your underlined word symbol in the passage, and when it's repeated in the little excerpt, you've got the underlined word there as well. Questions? Okay, this is new starting with spring 2020. There's been another change to this type of editing task items for just grades 3 to 6. They're going to a slightly new format. In print, item numbers will be displayed at the left margin next to the line that contains the underlined portion that corresponds to that item. And it'll make more sense when I show you the example next. In Braille, the item number is going to be enclosed in parentheses and moved so it immediately precedes the beginning of whatever is underlined, the corresponding underlined word or words. And so example on the next page. Now this example I made up because we don't have the practice test finalized yet, and so I don't have an example of the new format and the new way of doing it to show you, but I could kind of create it, what it would look like, and that's what I did. So notice at the top with the passage, in print, in the left margin, there's that number 16 that's on the same print line as the underlined ingredients colon. That is how it will look, more or less. I had to kind of, like I said, finagle this, but it'll have that item number on the left margin on the line where the underline is. And then the actual question is going to be slightly different too. Instead of repeating the underlined passage, it's going to have something that says something more straightforward, like choose the correct punctuation or whatever the task is. And then you're going to have your answer choices. I just wanted to give you an idea of what this new item type might look like in Braille and print. Okay, so in the last example, I'm just focusing on the sentence. I pulled out the sentence that correlates with that underlined word, ingredients, and the actual question. So here, it'd be two different sections because the passage would be on a previous page and then the questions would be on the next page. But to show it together, you've got the excerpt from the passage with the underlined word and the part of the item that corresponds with it. So it's in 1-1, starts in cell 1, runs over to cell 1. Do you notice at the end of the second line of Braille at the top, you have the open parentheses, numeric indicator, number 16, close parentheses. So that's where your item number is going to go in. And then directly following that, the beginning of the third line of Braille, you have the underlined word indicator with ingredients, colon. So that would seem to be make the most sense of how to note that item number. And that's how we're going to handle those kinds of items. And then we go to item 16. The question is going to be in 1-5. And then your answer choices are in 3-5. And you can't see it from this example, but if it were to run over, that's where it would run over to. It'd run over to cell 5. So questions about this? Nope, okay. All right, then there are editing tasks on the FSA math test that require students to choose the correct word, phrase, number, etc. for each blank. Students are then to write the letter of the option that's correct. Now note, some of these items have more than one blank with the same item. Thus, there has to be multiple answers. And so as a result of this, there's going to be implications for how a Braille reader writes their answers. So in print, there are going to be two ways that editing task items can appear. As we're going to see from the examples, you'll see the differences between them. In Braille, however, the editing tasks, regardless of what it looks like in print, are going to use blanks. And the blanks are going to be labeled paren 1, paren 2, etc. If there's 3, they'll be paren 3, and so on. And the answer choices are going to be moved from the bottom to follow the underline paren 1 and paren 2 respectively. And we'll see examples and it'll make more sense. These types of questions appear within all of the grade levels of the FSA math test. So this is at every level of the math tests. So here gives you one example of how it might look for, this is the grade 3 practice test, item number 9. So notice at the bottom you have the shapes are both, and then you have this box, and you have in the box A squares, B trapezoids, C rectangles. And then on the next line, because, and you have another box, A, B, and C answer choices with the end of the sentences. Obviously that would not work for a Braille reader. So we adjusted, the first sentence is changed to read, the two figures shown on the next page are, because we have to account for that if we can't fit it all on one Braille page. Note that the third sentence is changed to read, for each blank, write the letter of the word or phrase, and it goes on from there. So that's another adjustment we make for the Braille, and that would be noted in the Braille notes. Then the first sentence of the question is done in 1-5. Start in cell 1, runovers in cell 5. The second and third paragraphs, including the one with the blanks, are done in 7-5. Starts in cell 7 with runovers in cell 5. The blanks with the answer choices are done in 3-5. Answer choices A to C for blank 2 are all runovers of blank 2. So that's why each line starts in cell 5. So they're all considered runovers of that. Then the symbols for the blanks can vary at times from UEB to Nemeth depending on what content is in the answer choices and where the Nemeth switch indicators are, as is shown between this example and the next example. In this example, you see the UEB low line used for both of the blanks because the answer choices that follow it are just words. So you wouldn't switch into Nemeth, you wouldn't need to. And you wouldn't want to because you'd want to use contractions. Questions on that? Okay, then we've got, this is the other type of way it could appear in print, where instead of a box with the answer choices listed vertically, you have brackets with the answer choices just kind of following it. So you have blank A, mint, B, strawberry, close bracket, and then ice cream because blank, open bracket, A 65%, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the other way it can look in print. But as we said, we do it the same way in Braille. So the top paragraph with the blanks is done in 7-5, starts in 7, and runovers in cell 5. The blanks with the answer choices are done in 3-5. And then the symbol for the blanks can vary, as we said. So in this case, the Nemeth long dash is used. And they try and keep it consistent within a test item if possible. And that's what they were doing here. So the first blank wouldn't necessarily have to be done in the Nemeth long dash, but the next two do because of the percentage symbols. So to keep the blanks consistent, they did all of them in Nemeth. But they noticed they switched out of Nemeth so they could contract the word mint and strawberry, and then switch back into Nemeth. Okay, so if there is an equation outside of the context of the question, there is an equation outside of the context of the question, it will still appear in Nemeth this year. If it's in a test that a math or science test that is transcribed in UEB with Nemeth, then Channing, yes, that is correct. If a test is ordered in UEB technical, there will be no Nemeth in it. The math test will be straight UEB the whole time. Okay, so I guess that's a good distinction to make. So this is more showing you what could be shown if it was a UEB with Nemeth test. If it's done in UEB technical, there will be no Nemeth in it whatsoever, and so you'd never see the Nemeth long dash. It would always be the UEB, my brain just went blank. It would always be the low line, UEB low line. Let's see. Okay, you got it, good. Good question, Channing. Okay, moving on. Unless there's other questions. All right, in grades 3 to 10 ELA reading, grades 3 to 8 math, and end of course exams, algebra and geometry, they have questions presented in a table format. In Braille, all of these questions are handled the same way. Each row heading is presented separately, and it's followed by the answer choices, the corresponding answer choices, the answer choices that go with it listed vertically. And so let's look at it. So this is an example from the reading grade 3 practice test. You've got your table, your row heading is they build a new nest. And then your columns are answer choices, A first, B next, C finally. Note that the first sentence is going to be changed from fill in the circle to write the letters. So if we look at the Braille for this, the question number with its sentence is in 1-5. And then the row heading sentences are 5-5. Even though you can't really see it from this example, you can see it in the grade 9 reading with item number 9. So you've got the row heading, they build a new nest, and then you have A first, B next, C finally, and so on and so forth. The answer choices are done in 3-5, and can't see it from this, but you can see it in grade 8 reading item 15. Let's see, are you going to explain? Okay, Lynette, I just saw your question, but explain that the needed word follows the number. That's back with the footnotes, and yeah, since there's no space, you put it right next to it, I think, is what you were saying. And Andrea, are you only taking the table apart because each blank is a letter choice? These, as we see, these tables can get more and more complex. While some might have been able to be done as tables, it's easier to make the formatting consistent because there's some stuff, there's no way in Braille you could fit it as a table. So this seemed like the best way to handle it. All right, so moving on, another example of the table format from grade 8 math, item 4, is you've got these square roots, square root of 81, and then A rational, B irrational, and so on. So here again, you're going to have the question number with its sentence in 1-5. You'll have the row heading in 5-5, and the answer choice is done in 3-5. All right. Now here's another one that was a little bit more unique. This one, there is no row headings. So in this case, we're going to use each column heading and present that separately, followed by the corresponding answer choices listed vertically. In this way, the Braille stays consistent no matter what that table looks like. And so our students can have a consistent presentation of these types of questions. So this is from FSA grade 6 math practice test item 12. And here the top paragraph is in 7-5. The column headings are in 5-5. And the answer choices are in 3-5. So we have independent variable, A, cost per bushel of corn, and so on. And so you got ABC, and then it goes to the next column heading, department variable, I'm sorry, dependent variable, and then E through H, and so on. Okay, remember I said you have to know the standards and anything's fair game. So they have to know three-dimensional figures, but they don't necessarily have to know three-dimensional figures put together to create pictures. So this is from the geometry practice test number 2. And so instead of having them have to figure out the pictures of the castles, we reformatted this item in Braille so that it tells them they have to identify the 3D drawing of each basic shape, creating the castle. And so on this one, the row heading is going to be the actual three-dimensional shapes for each castle, followed by the answer choices, A cone, B cylinder, C pyramid, D rectangular prism, and so on. So that's how we adapted it. Same kind of thing. We're still doing the same kind of thing as far as the formatting goes, but you can see how it gets more and more complex. Let's see, what else do I need to mention? And three-dimensional drawings is something they have to know how to be able to recognize from a tactile graphic. Grades 3 to 8 and the EOCs contain response grids, questions, and some have multiple response grids. So if we look, here's an example from geometry from item number 13, the practice test. And so you've got N equals and a response grid and Q equals and a response grid. Well, anytime you have something in front of or following those response grids, then we actually do something with it in Braille. The formats of these can vary slightly, but they appear in grade 6, grade 8, algebra 1, and geometry practice tests. So if we look at the Braille, you've got the response grid. Anytime it's a response grid question, it has the RG after the question number. So we have number 13, and then we have all caps RG. That tells them this is a response grid question. And that is noted to them on the transcriber's notes page about how these are handled. So it's important for them to read the transcriber's notes page. So RG follows a question number, and there's always a TN, a transcriber's note, TN transcriber's note at the end of the question with the number of positions they have to fill in. How many boxes do they have to fill in for this response grid? Usually it's 7, but not always. So it can be 7 positions, It can be 7 positions for each of 2 answers. It could be 7 positions for each of 3 answers. It just depends on the question. So the question number with its paragraph is in 1-5 formatting, starting in cell 1, runovers in cell 5. The actual question is in 7-5, starting in cell 7, runovers in cell 5. And the simulated response grids are in 3-5. So notice we have n equals, and we have 7 full Braille cells to represent each blank or box. And then we have q equals, and then the 7 full Braille cells for each blank or box. Okay, questions. Anybody have any questions? We can go back to when it's talking about political cartoons in U.S. history. Who should provide descriptions? If it's talking about working on them in class, I would suggest that you work with whoever the teacher is. And you may have to brainstorm together. If you put in Google guidelines for writing picture descriptions or whatnot, you should be able to come up. There is a bunch of guidelines for doing it. I'm not very familiar with it, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know there is guidelines out there for how you create descriptions and what to do. And so Yayla also asked, who should provide descriptions in, so if it's in the practice test, the actual official practice test that gets ordered by the school assessment coordinator or the district assessment coordinator, then those descriptions will be in that Braille test already, because we will have worked with Region 4 to put in those Braille descriptions. We don't write the Braille descriptions, but we help make sure they get in and they're correct and they're good. If it's district created practice, then again, I would still say try and get with someone who knows the content and work with them to try and create an appropriate description, balancing giving enough relevant information to be able to answer the question, but without giving away the answer and giving either an unfair advantage or unfair disadvantage. And that's about the best I can tell you right now for who should provide practice for district tests and stuff. But you want to involve someone who knows the content as well, because they're going to know what are the really key important things about that content in that cartoon or in that material. Okay, I think that answers those questions. Okay, I see. Will questions about the castles have tactile images or just descriptions? Good question. Though, because it's identifying a 3-dimensional tactile image, those will be tactile graphics of 3-dimensional images. So it'd be a tactile graphic of a cone, or a tactile graphic of a cylinder, or a tactile graphic of a prism, whatever is needed. Now, occasionally, and sometimes this happens, you might get an animation where, let's say it's, I know there is in the practice geometry test, there's an animation of a construction using a compass to construct something, a mathematical compass. And so what we ended up having to do with that is I think it broke into like 4 or 5 frames. So you had actual tactile graphics with descriptions in addition to those tactile graphics to be able to have with it to understand it. And that's how the animation for that particular practice test item was handled. And I cover that in the assessment webinar and show that example. And I'm not sure if we're just going to have one assessment webinar this year or if we're going to have a separate one for the alternate assessment or not. We're still kind of waiting to hear about that. Okay, good questions. Any other questions? Going? No? All right, well then let's move on because it's 3:30 or just about 3:30. And so we're going to do our evaluation questions. Please fill these out so we can continue to do things like webinars. Oh, good. I'm glad that it was helpful, Bobby. Okay, I'm launching the poll. Thanks, Sherry. You're welcome. Okay, so please go ahead and do our questions so we can report this information to the Department of Education and so that we know, so that we can continue to get funding to be able to continue to do these things. See, the number's still going up a little bit of people responding, so give it a little bit more time. If you're like me and read a little slower. There is a poll. I have the poll up. Teresa, I'm not sure. Yeah, Cassidy, I can share the. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Hillsborough County's network might be having an issue and blocking it. Thank you for the assistance. So yeah, some of the districts you might be getting blocked from the poll, and if that's the case, I understand. Ah, thank you, Lynette. I'm glad it was helpful. Okay, don't worry about it, Teresa. It's SDHC is blocking it. All right, and let's see, did I respond to everything? Cassidy, I'll repeat the opening code in a minute when I get to the closing quote. And nope, I haven't said the closing code yet. All right, I think that's almost 3 minutes. I think that's enough for everybody. I think a lot of you might be blocked too. All right, so I'm going to end the poll. All right, so our closing code, well, let me start. Our closing code is Braille on. So our opening code was keep calm, and our closing code is Braille on. Keep calm and Braille on. And if you have a lot of Braille students, it's Braille on and on and on and on. You are welcome, Cassidy. Welcome, Miriam. All right, the next assessment webinar, just to let you know, is November 19th at 2 p.m. And that's more focused on more general stuff with the assessments and for computer-based and Braille and the item types and that kind of thing. Not so much focused on the formatting of the Braille. This was something separate that we thought might be helpful. Good, I'm glad this was helpful. Okay, so that's the next assessment webinar. You can always contact me with questions. Here's K&I's contact information and FIMC's contact information. And with that, I am going to stop the recording.